I was asked to, basically my briefing for this was like, Chris, do something about CSS3. Okay. Um, I've been doing a lot about CSS3 in the last few months, and basically it was for testing the browser and telling people, no, it works in Firefox. It's not only Chrome. So that's cozy. People, please keep your hands to yourself, although it's dark. Um, and I think CSS3 is one of these things that we just haven't thought of enough as web developers, because as web developers we got this massive monkey on our back that is called Internet Explorer 6. And we always think that everything else is broken, and we're not trusting ourselves to do these kind of things and using the new technologies that are out there. And I'm going to show you what benefits it has to actually think about CSS3 and what can be done, and actually what the problems with CSS are as well. So there's CSS for fun and profit. I mean, when CSS came out, I was just very excited because before that I had like table layouts and font tags and background color and these kind of things. And every time I need to change it, I need to change 10,000 files rather than one file where all the look and feel is actually still defined. And so it defines the look and feel of our web products. And the look and feel is important, not only the look. It used to be just change the underline of links, and when you roll over them, you put the underline on it. So we go, oh, this is amazing. But nowadays it's much more than that, because it's actually also animation, it's also transitions, it's also all the things that we use jQuery for, and actually hammer the browser with it without really needing to. So the main benefit of using CSS3 for stuff is that you help the browser perform. Because as CSS3 and animation and transition and all the things are done by the browser in the browser engine, we can make it faster. If you make your own animations and transitions and stuff in jQuery, we can't make that faster because you do it yourself. And it's up to you to make that perform better. So we have a chance to fix the browser, but we can't fix all your code. So here's the choice. It centralizes the visual. You change it once, you apply it everywhere. That's very, very good. Like always my favorite was before we had fonts. Let's come back to that later. Centralizes the visual, change once, apply everywhere. Results in overall smaller documents because you don't have to look and feel into your documents anymore. You don't have the font tags, you don't have the background colors, you don't define lots of stuff that is just available for all the documents in every single one of them. And you have a separation of concerns. You leave the visuals to those who want them. So a lot of developers actually go into web development that come from C++ or other things and then say like, oh, CSS is awful, I hate using it, I hate using it. Don't use it. Partner with somebody who cares about it and let them do it. And give them the handle to actually put classes in your HTML so they can put the CSS in there. Like, it's amazing how much time we spend on whining about a certain technology rather than just partnering with other people who like to use that technology. Every 2 weeks I hear somebody saying like, oh, JavaScript is going to be dead in 2 weeks because language so-and-so will going to replace it. Not going to happen. Just deal with it and find somebody who cares about JavaScript and build something together and have fun doing the things that you want to do. Life's too short to be annoyed about semicolons and stuff. So it eases the maintenance. It's much easier to change a color than to create lots of new images. A lot of times we build images for things that actually can be done in the browser nowadays. And it's much easier to change a color when the rebranding happens and you just call it a gradient background or something like that rather than green to blue gradient, because if a green to blue gradient class name is red to yellow when there was a rebranding in the company, that's really, really confusing in the maintenance. You want to make sure that you make the maintenance as easy as possible. I always say, write your code as if the person taken over from you is a homicidal maniac with an axe that knows where you live. Like, I always write for the next developer, not for myself, because I found myself so many times in the situation. I looked at something and said like, oh my god, that's terrible, terrible code. What kind of idiot was it? Oh, it was me. Huh. A few months ago. So make sure that you write for maintenance, not you write for basically being clever or being writing 10 lines of code rather than 50 lines of code. And it's a very simple and powerful access to the document. Like, a lot of people love jQuery and love other languages because, or libraries, because I can access everything in the document with that. CSS already has that built in. That's what CSS is for. You access things into the document, and CSS applies it to the document before it renders it. Whereas anything you do in JavaScript applies it after you render the page and you do another rendering, which on a desktop doesn't make a difference, but on a phone could make a difference of massive performance. Make sure that you let the browser do the thing and then show it. Of course, there's also CSS for pain and suffering, not only for fun and profit. Because there's browser support issues, there's differences in browsers, new things don't come out all the time, there's lots of experimental stuff going on in browsers that then become out of a sudden mainstream, and everybody says like, oh, everybody has Safari, why does that work? Because not everybody has Safari, that's your answer. There is syntax very different to programming languages. Like when you come from a programming language that has proper syntax and you go to CSS, you're like, what were you thinking there? Like shortcut notations of animations where the value of a certain parameter defines which parameter it is, not like a name of it, because there's no naming of them. And you just need to know the order of the thing, the order of the parameters to make it right. That's like writing PHP. It's just bizarre, which I do. It's not a bad language if you use it right. Specificity, which is hard to pronounce and tough to understand. It basically means that the more selector things you put on there, that the more likely it will be rendered, which is like why we have all these massive CSS files in the world. Like, it's not that you actually look at what people have done before you. You just put another line there with 12 more selectors and say like HTML body p hash so-and-so class so-and-so, and look, now the color is applied. I don't want to analyze what the guy has done before me, and that's why we got these massive lines of code. I remember I did visitbritain.com, which is the tourism portal of England. .NET product. It was like 250,000 pages in 37 languages, and it had 12 templates, and I made 400 lines of CSS to cover the whole thing. And then it went into maintenance, and half a year later it was 7,650 lines of CSS. Because nobody looked at my stuff, they just added to it. So that's a very, very dangerous thing to do in CSS. So overly attached to the document, no reset possible. So a lot of times you make like very complex long selectors where you say like, okay, HTML, header, hash so-and-so, class so-and-so. And if one of those goes away, or you want to overwrite it, you have to add another one. You'll make sure your selectors are as short as possible. And there's also no reset in the document itself. So if you have something set up to the body, it actually permeates to the whole through the whole document, which is good. That's the cascading part of CSS. So I don't want to define the font on every element. I want to define it on the body ones. But what do you do then when you have, for example, a widget that gives you like the look and feel from Facebook inside your page, and you don't want the font from your body to go into it? There's no way of doing that because it gets applied. So you have to put more classes in, more IDs in to override that one. Browser quirks, flash of unstyled content in France. So that's another thing that you find that like your CSS gets applied too late, so it looks awful and then it looks good. And that's, for us developers, that's the end of the world. For most end users, it's actually not that much of a problem, but it's something that product managers find out as well and tell us to fix rather than like caring about what the end user really needs. And then you got these wonderful little things that we only found out because of Drupal, that Internet Explorer 6 only loads 32 style sheets, and then it doesn't load the next one. Like, because every little module in Drupal had its own style sheet, so you had like 32 style sheets in one document, and the last one didn't get applied. So you got these little things, or the first iPhone did 4K of JavaScript, and then it cut off the rest, and there was no way to actually do it. A few providers in England, mobile phone providers, pack the CSS before they send it to the browser and mess with your CSS that way. There's all kind of things going on, but that's what the web is about. There's hundreds of best practices, but no consensus. Every half year there's something, this is how to do CSS. You never have to think about it again. And then like, that's the opposite of the last best practice. What's going on there? It's because people don't talk to each other, that's why. So what are dangers when dealing with CSS? And I already mentioned that a bit, that we actually tack on and tack on and tack on and may put more things in all the time, and then we end up with a mess like that. Yes, the power still runs through it, but what if one of them breaks? Which one is it? So one of the things I keep calling is pestering the elderly, which is basically sending things to Internet Explorer that it cannot, Internet Explorer 6, that it cannot stomach anymore. Like, that thing was not made to actually animate things in the client. This thing was made for a web that was like blue links clicking to other things and showing them, maybe a table layout, but not the really, really big thing. It's like going to the park and taking a pensioner and shaking him like, let's do some CrossFit, let's run together. Like, don't do that. I mean, I kept saying that like the love we give Internet Explorer 6 borders on necrophilia at times. It's just users that are dependent on Internet Explorer 6 are not used to beauty. Don't give them anything beautiful, it just confuses them. Give them something that works, and that's probably if your app does or if your app or your site allows them to do the task that they came for, done. And you don't need anything else. You don't need anything to look the same across all browsers, which is something I'm coming to as well. One big issue we had, which got so bad that Opera needed to actually say, okay, we don't do our own browser anymore, we're now WebKit as well, is that as web developers, we failed to understand that there's not a single browser. We keep doing that. We have all these tools that run only on Internet Explorer 6 because in 1999 it was the coolest thing ever, and no other browser would ever be better. And now we do the same thing with WebKit and with Safari and with Chrome. So this is a common happenstance on the web, that you have like a button with the color white and a background of WebKit linear gradient, green and yellow, which of course green and yellow buttons are a crime in itself, but that's just a demo here. So what's the problem with that? If I go there with a browser that is not WebKit, I get a white button with a white background. So I get white text on white background, and it doesn't work. And users say like, I don't know what that interface is, I don't know what's going on there. There's a simple way around that, which basically is you start with a background green for all browsers, and you actually then do a background WebKit linear gradient green-yellow, which is for WebKit, and then linear gradient. So everything that comes with a dash, name dash, will bite you. It's test data. It's something that you play with, and it's something that browsers test out. The things without the dash, name dash are the ones that you can use. These are the ones that all the browsers agreed upon. The ones that actually don't have any of those, like the background green, works in every browser, including Internet Explorer 6. So make sure that you actually write defensive code that way and don't rely on things that are flaky and actually will bite you. You don't want to maintain that code in the future. So new browsers will actually I have to do something because there's actually a typo in there and that drives me nuts. So Posscon CSS3, you probably found it as well. Where are they? Ta-da, semicolon. So do that, don't do the other. It's more code, but it actually is an insurance for you that it will work and it will show something to people. It would be a green button, not a green and yellow button, but it will be a nice button. So we keep chasing that misguided dream that we can make that one look and feel that works across all devices and all browsers. There is a technology for that. It's called releasing JPEGs. Otherwise, you will never look the same, and that's neutering the web. If you make everything look the same, you made it mediocre for everybody. You don't make it interesting. Like, think about when you want to support different environments to get the best out of each environment and not actually one that fits all. Think about food. You never go out for food and saying like, hey, I want to have something edible. You go out and say like, I want to have something yummy. I want to have something beautiful. I want to have something that in the context makes most sense to eat right now. So let's dive in. The first thing that in CSS3 we have much more than we had in CSS2 is great selector support and very random selectors at times. So this is a very simple thing that's a form with a button saying make it so, and a text under it explaining to you what to do with the form. Now, in non-CSS3 environments, we would have to put a class on that P element that is basically that please enter your search term and hit the button and put the class in there. But in CSS3, we got this wonderful selector here that says like, if you got an input type, give it a padding, give it a font, give it these kind of things. If got an input, give it a background of yellow. If the input is the type of submit, then give it a background of green. So that makes actually sure that you can actually override it only for the one that is the odd one out. Not put an extra class on it, not put an ID on it. You don't need that. You just can do that with the selector itself. And then you can change the colors to anything you want. So I want to say blue here, and it becomes blue. This selector here says like everything that follows after the input type submit, either with another element in between or itself, so it's a bit of a wiggly thing, hey, something's coming, should get the color 999. So that one now gets this, is this gray here, and I can change that to something else as well. So that is a simple way of dealing with it and differentiating between an input and an input type button, which is something we always did, like we put input type class button on something, which we don't need to do any longer. So your CSS can become much, much smaller that way. And you can override all the things that came from the original styling. People are always complaining like, oh, buttons always look horrible. So you just say like border none, and then you actually have no border around it. And then you can actually start doing things like rounded corners. So you can say like border radius, 5 pixels, and out of a sudden you've got a nicer, smaller round button. And you don't need Photoshop for that. You don't need to change anything like that. You can do it live in the browser here in the way that I've done it, but you can actually make it for your things. So the selector support is great for doing like things like I could style links that have an HTTP differently to links that are internal to the page, just with one of those attribute selectors that you see here, the type submit. So look at those to actually make sure that you differentiate without having to add lots and lots of classes on it. And then you can actually change according to the state of the things as well. So for example, if I want to have this this text now here that I have with 000, when I want to fade that out, actually when I focus on that field, I can just do a hover to a focus here. So if I say input focus and type submit after the other P, I can actually do it without that one as well. Let's try that one out. Then I can make it to a CCC. And once I click on that, it actually grays it out. I don't need any JavaScript for that. I don't need anything else for that. I can use a pseudo selector, in this case focus, to actually have different parts of the page react differently when the user interacts with it. So there's lots of length units. A lot of times we use pixels and we use like points, and people use centimeters and millimeters on the web, which are never understood. And you have EM, which is basically the size of the M in that font. We have REM, which is the size of the main font of the document and not the one that is actually getting smaller and smaller when you start nesting EMs and EMs. We got percentages, we've got PICAS, we got XCH, all these kind of things. Really cool ones are these new ones here. VW, VH, Vmin, and Vmax. This means like a percentage of the screen size. So I can make the font resize with the screen, which is really, really cool, which has been done possible in Flash for years. Never was possible without JavaScript in HTML. Now we can do it with CSS. So I can say this page should always be like 60% of the screen, and the font in it should be like 40% bigger than the original font when you resize it. So that's a great way to have like dynamic text, and this is important when you think about mobile phones. They're always smaller, but the font should be bigger so I can read it. So you can calculate that yourself, or you can use VW, VH, and so on and so forth. Now, pseudo selectors are a really interesting part because that makes CSS interactive. So in this case, I got the link hover visited active. That's the classic one where we change the underline of a link, and then when you hovered over it, you put it there. You got focus for keyboard focus. You've got empty for empty selectors, which is interesting if, for example, have something that doesn't have a text, but when it has a text, you start showing it. You got only child, you got nth child, last of type, nth of type, and so on and so forth. So there's lots and lots of fun to be had with those. And to show that what it means, I showed this page here. So I've got the children LI. So that's when I look at that here, that's a UL element. So if I inspect this in the browser, I can see that this is here just a list element with the ID of children and a class of inline, which gives you this inline element here. Now I have this selector here saying first child, give that one the green thing. So if I can now change that to last child, it actually does it to the last one. So I don't need to put classes in my HTML ever again, because the list can be dynamic. I load it from the database, and I only give the last one a rounded corner, or the first one. I also have nth child, which is once again where CSS is getting annoying, because every programmer starts counting at 0. This starts counting at 1 as normal human beings, which is probably good, but not necessarily what we are. So, and then I can start doing 2, 3, 5, or I can actually say odd and even. So for the odd ones, I list the first and second. For the even, I do the other ones. Then I can do, for example, nth child, 2n, 1n plus 1. No, 2n plus 1, every second one. 2n plus 1, the other one around. So you can calculate and shift the things around. So you can play with everything in the page just with the selector, and that's pretty sweet, because we've never had that before. And the great example for that is zebra tables, like tables with a gray line, white line, gray line, white line. You don't have to put extra classes in all of them. Your HTML gets smaller, everybody's happy. Now, typography in fonts is a very interesting part, because now we actually can embed fonts in our pages. So instead of having to actually use images for fonts that are not editable, that are not highlightable, that are not like resizable, you can use real fonts in your pages. And there's great stuff. I mean, like the Google Web Font typo stuff is amazing, like Google Web Fonts. When you try that one out, and there's, for example, this wonderful font called Annie Get Your Telescope. Yeah, this one here. You can say like quick use, and all you would have to do is actually put that link in there, and then you actually have that font in the page, and you can start using fonts in the page. Hosted by Google for you, showing you also how much K size it has on the page when you want to use it. And that was always quite fun, because every client came up to me and said, like, we have this company font, can we have that on our website? Which of course were copyright infringement in most of the cases, because they didn't buy the license to actually show it to the world outside. They just bought it for their own materials. And back in the days, this was impossible to do. The first time we had fonts was Internet Explorer, I think in 2002 or something like that. But you had like 10 different font formats across different browsers. And my favorite, that's one of my favorite requests, because every web developer would always like, oh my God, the client asked me to put their font in. I knew for a fact that they have the font installed on their computers. So I just gave it the font name, and in their office it always looked right. And outside, back then nobody tested, so that was good. But nowadays we can do it with we can embed any TTF, any other font in the page, so you can go nuts with that. And people use that for icons, for example. So instead of having icons, you can use icon fonts that actually have like all the icons in one font file, and then you can edit as much as possible. It's a wonderful thing. I know nothing about typography, so that's why I'm actually just making jokes about it. Media queries is a really, really cool thing. Media queries give us the opportunity to actually react to the size of the screen and give you different environments. So for a mobile phone, I could only show you big buttons and 4 of them, and on the desktop, I show you the whole thing around it, which is, a lot of people do that just for design, but it actually is a good use case for context as well. So I could show you 3 buttons to say, like, I visited this client, he was good, I sold it so-and-so with so much money. And when I go back home and open the same document on my desktop, I get the form next to it explaining the details about the visit. So I can triage on the road, and then when I go home, I actually have a different environment, but it's the same page. I don't have to go into a different environment and upload data from my hard drive, from my phone to it or anything like that. In general, media queries are used to just to resizing things. So there's actually an interesting site called MediaQuery.es in Spain, and that one shows showcases of how media queries are used in websites to give you different experiences across different devices. So if I say, for example, the Store Norske lexicon, which is the big Norwegian lexicon, cool. And if I try that out, I can see that on this screen right now, it looks like this. But if I resize the screen, then it becomes different and give me a different, simpler interface according to the screen that I'm using it for. And that is all done with media queries. That is done in CSS without needing any JavaScript or any re-rendering of the page or anything like that. In Firefox, it's really great to actually test that as well, because we added this developer tool called Responsive Design View. So you don't have to resize the browser itself. You can just resize the screen in the browser. And you can rotate that, and you can actually simulate different sizes of like iPads and these kind of things. And you can still keep the developer tools intact. So you can still edit the HTML and the CSS accordingly, but you just see it there. So great for developing for Firefox OS, especially because you have your dev tools open and you have the thing there. Yeah.
I was ready to
The responsive view, tools, web developer, responsive view, or Option Shift M, Option Command M, whatever. So there's lots and lots of fun tools to be had, and I think responsive design is very, very powerful, but it can also be very, very dangerous, because a lot of people then they start with the iPad Retina look and feel and put like 15 meg images in there and then just resize it to 320 pixels and wonder why the site is still slow. It does not, hiding it doesn't mean it doesn't load it. There's actually a JavaScript equivalent of media queries called something that I forgot right now, But you can load content according to resized screens as well. So that's a better way of actually dealing with that. But it's a very powerful thing to do, the media queries, and it's a very simple-ish syntax where I can say minimum width is 700 pixels and orientation is landscape. Minimum width and maximum width is very important. Rather than like just saying width, you can actually say like, okay, this should always be 700 pixels or more. So if there's more space, use more space. If there's not enough space, then just make it smaller. So you can actually define the breakpoints rather than defining the fixed size, because fixed sizes will bite you. A wonderful thing about this is that iPads came out with a 1024 resolution, and then everybody said like, yay, 1024, iPads will always be 1024, and then the iPad mini came out, which Apple said they will never release, because 7-inch tablets are stupid. And this one is smaller, and has these borders around it that the big one doesn't have. So it has a 1024 resolution, but actually it's a smaller screen. So the fonts that you define perfectly in pixel size for 1024 for an iPad will be unreadable on an iPad mini. And here comes the kicker. There's no way in software to detect if it's an iPad mini or an iPad, because they tell you they're the same thing. So forget pixels. Gradients, great thing. Gradients are a pain to optimize because in GIF or in JPEG, they look frazzled, and in GIF you basically only have 256 colors. That's why it's a good idea in CSS to just use linear gradient. So you can say to right with hot pink and goldenrod, which is the best colors of course there are, and then you can say to left, and that will turn it around, or you say to top, and you can turn it around that way. Or you can actually say 90 degrees or 27 degrees, and you can turn all kind of things in there. These are just linear gradients right now, and it works across browsers, like even Internet Explorer. And you can also have Internet Explorer 9. And then you have a radial gradient as well, which has a different syntax, which is basically hot pink to goldenrod. And that one now radiates from the middle to the side out there. And you can do wild things with that if you know how to use it, which I don't, because I don't know what looks good. But you have these CSS patterns, for example, which is done by Leah Varoo. That's a CSS Secrets, hang on. Let's give Google some money, there you go. So this stuff, none of that is images. This is basically all generated with CSS. And it means that if you want to change the color, you just change the color and make it different. So this pattern here in the background is slightly different. So if I say instead of black here, I could say white, and then I can change all of them around. So I don't need to generate those images constantly when I want to do something with them. On the desktop, really good idea. On a mobile phone, especially when you shift things around and move them, gradients, use them sparingly. Don't use them too brutally. But for something that just needs to have a nice little touch, it's a wonderful thing. And if you're somebody like me who doesn't know what looks good, there's a wonderful gradient generator as well, which is called colorzilla.com. And that one is actually an extension to Firefox, but it has this gradient generator thing. And that one just has these presets that look good and make people think that you know your stuff. And basically it gives you all the text to generate, the CSS to generate, that works for all the browsers out there. So gradients, one thing. Shadows is the next one. Shadow, very simple. Horizontal, vertical, blur, spread, color, inset. And then you see this is what it looks like. So 4 pixels, 4 pixels, 10 pixels, 2 pixels in black. If I want to have like a green color, I just change the color. If I want to spread it out much bigger, I can change that number. If I want to shift it around, going to the top instead of going to the bottom, or going to the left instead of to the right, I just make negative values. I can make anything that I can do in Photoshop basically in CSS nowadays. And this is editable. This can be changed by another designer later on without having to create lots and lots of images. And works for me, and is rather pretty as well. You can do really good effects if you do things like really huge things, like 2 AM, for example, and you just give it a, rather than a dark one, you can give it a lighter one. It just gives it a little touch and makes it like blend in a bit more. And you can do all of that with pseudo selectors. You can change the look and feel according to when you click on it as well. So box shadow, of course, the other thing is text shadow. So I can actually say text shadow instead of box shadow, and yeah, cool. And I do like 2 pixels there. Let's see if that works out. And do a 0, 0, 0. And then I have a shadow on the text. So both the text and the box can have a shadow. And a slight text shadow can make a big difference when you have it on a background image, for example, to make it readable or to make it crisper and all these things that I don't know because I'm not a designer. Transforms, and I used the Bumblebee, the transformer, to show that, are a thing that, funnily enough, were in Internet Explorer 5, but looked awful. That's why back then nobody cared. But it's a very powerful thing. So this is text. This is not an image. So this is a normal text. So if I set the skew to 0 here and the scale to 1, then I just realized this is a normal text with a yellow background in this case. But I can actually skew it in like several degrees, and I can scale it to different sizes. So this font, this slide deck, for example, is 800 by 600 pixels, but I use scale to scale it to the screen. So I never have to care what the resolution of the projector is because it's always different. I have skew, I have rotate, so I can actually rotate something in 20 degrees as well. And the scale is actually quite cute. It makes it a bit fuzzy when you go too big, but it's actually a quite little interesting thing to do a little like rollover touching, for example, to make it interesting that way. If I rotate it negatively, of course I rotate it to the other side. A very important bit to think about is actually that transform does all the things accumulatively. So I rotate it, I scale it, but I can also now translate it. That doesn't mean I translate it to another language, but I translated it by pixels. So I say like translated it 20 pixels to the left and 20 pixels to the bottom, and then it shifts it around. So if I now do the 0 degrees here, you realize that the translation happened by shifting it around. This one is like using top and left. Like normally we always used in CSS2, we used position absolute and then top and left, which is simple and works in all the browsers. But transform is hardware optimized, so it will be rendered on the video card. So if you do something on mobile devices, especially on low-spec mobile devices like the Firefox OS phone, where is that, by the way? Good. Then you want to use transform instead of using left and top, because we can help you as the browser makers to make it actually work and make it faster that way. So translate is the one that hardly anybody ever uses, but it's very, very powerful. And of course, once we had it in 2D space, we also had it in 3D space. So we got 3D transforms in this case here, where we define a perspective. Perspective means how far away we are from that element. So we've got a cube of 800 by 800 pixels where this thing is going to be placed in. And then we have a transform style preserve 3D, which means like make sure that the 3D is actually visible. Like there's a transform style don't do 3D. Why that is in there, I still don't know. And then you have a transform of rotate X, Y, and Z. So you say rotate X to 50 degrees, and I can say 30 degrees, I can say 20 degrees, 10 degrees, 90 degrees would make it invisible because it's tilted completely in the space that you can't see it anymore. You can scale it, you can rotate it around the Z-axis, you can rotate it around the Y-axis as well to shift it around and do all the cool 3D stuff in there. You can do amazing stuff with that. You can also go massively overboard with it. But it's actually pretty sweet what we can do with it. I did this 3D tester thing. Where I actually, when I try to understand something, I write myself a bit of an emulator, a generator, so I really don't have to think about it anymore. But I know actually what I've been doing here. So I can rotate this now in all the 3 spaces, and I know then which axis is what. So if I say rotate the cube that it's in by 20, and in those 3, then I know which ones are the ones where you rotate it in. So Z is basically moving it forward, moving it backward. Y is basically rotating it in that moment here, up and down. And X rotates it in itself in the 90 degrees. So if I do the 0, 0, 0 here, and I do the rotation, oh, that was coordinates, now I do the rotation, I can see that all the things are there. Once I'm happy with that, what I've done here, and I think it's a rather cool thing to start with, I can create the full page, and I copy myself the HTML, and I try starting and playing with that. And you can do wonderful things with that. For example, the kitten cube that I made. There you go. That was a joystick-powered kitten cube, where actually I showed that I can use a joystick with my browser and rotate kittens around. So that was And that's the kind of things that clients pay us a lot of money for. That's actually necessary. But it shows you what you can do with browsers, and it's actually pretty sweet. I get a lot of people on my blog, as we're there, actually asking me about that sidebar, and that's exactly doing the same thing. So that sidebar here is basically slightly tilted, and when you hover over it, it's that. It's just a 3D transformation, a 3D rotate. It's not flash, it's not anything else.
How did you animate it? Like, why is it smooth and not just a sudden jump?
We're coming to that. So 3D transforms, nice idea. Sometimes it actually is better to use a 3D transform than a 2D transform, because on iOS in older versions it will be hardware accelerated if you do 3D instead of 2D, because 2D didn't get hardware accelerated. So transitions, really cool thing. Transitions is the smoothness between two things. So if you want to go from one state to another in a smooth fashion without having to animate everything yourself, you just put a transition in there. So in this case I have a transition here on a transition ID with a background in red and transition of 1 second. And on hover, I want to have the background white. So when I roll over this now, it goes into white in a smooth fashion, rather than just going without the transition. If I would do a 0 second, it would just be normal rollover here. But with 1 second, it does it smoothly. And that works in everything. So I can basically say the width of it should be 200 pixels. And then the width of the other one should be 500 pixels. And then it does the transformations, both of them at the same time, smoothly in one way to another. This is the timing, so I can basically say 0.5 seconds to make it faster. And there is a second parameter where I can say 2 seconds, where I roll over it, it waits 2 seconds, and then it actually animates to the other state. So you can make really powerful, cute little interfaces, and a transition, just making it smoother, can make a massive difference for the happiness of our end users.
Can you do the two transitions independently of each other?
Yeah,
Like,
you can do a transition. You can do the second transition with a timing of 2 seconds, and the second one with a delay of 2 seconds. Okay. So you can do just say give a the transition gives the first thing. So I could say transition color background with that delay. And the timing, and then I do a transition width with the other one, so I can change the color and then the width.
Okay.
You can list as many transitions as you want to just by comma separating them.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. In Firefox it does. In lesser known browsers, not so much. Chrome is thinking about it as well. On pseudo elements, it works in Firefox, but these are all nice things to have. So if it animates in one browser and not in another. If the user doesn't know about it, fine. They will not miss it. If you promise it to the user and then you don't deliver, then you have a problem. So make it
I see you using Sublime to edit it. I'm using Sublime right now, and I can't, like, it doesn't automatically highlight like transitions.
No, this is not Sublime. This is something I wrote myself. So this is.
But like for the other one, because you were entering and you had the audio, right?
Yeah. Because I already had transition once in the document. So it auto-completes to what is already in the document. Sublime Text learns from the rest of the document. Yeah. So, and there's also there's a HTML5 package for Sublime Text that has this stuff in there. So animations are transitions that are defined. Transition basically, the good thing about transition is I just can put a transition on something and it gets smoothly from one state to another. I don't need to know what that state is. In animations, I define what all the things are. And that way it becomes more powerful as an animation tool, but it becomes trickier because I have to define everything. So in this case, I have this club med animation, whatever, and I define my keyframes where I can say at 0%, scale it to 0.5 and translate it to 0.0. At 50%, scale it to 2 and translate it to 50%. And at 100%, scale it to 0.5 and translate it to 100% there. And then I animate it in 3 seconds. I can make that faster now. I can say at 0.5 seconds. Not so much so nice. But 2 seconds is nice. And I have the infinite here as well. If I delete that one, then it does it only once. So it actually animates it once, but infinite will start, or you can say like 2 times, 5 times, something like that. So it does it 3 times, and then it doesn't animate it anymore. But with infinite, it keeps animating it constantly. So this one now goes to the 3 times. I have the linear thing, so infinite. I have the linear thing, which means it just animates it in the same speed from beginning to end. If I don't do linear, then I get all these more natural movements that actually go faster and then slower. So that was actually made to actually make animations look better. When you roll a ball over a field, it doesn't go in the same speed. It actually starts faster and then gets slower. And that's what the easing functions do there. So you can say like only ease out, and that would actually go slower at the end of it, but linear at the beginning. Or you can just say linear. So in this case, this animation looks much better with linear because you don't want this jerkiness to go on there. So animations are very powerful to make things go constantly. And animations are actually have not the problem of JavaScript animations that they use up a lot of memory because they're actually in the browser and browsers do that already. So FLEXBOX is one thing that is finally giving us the opportunity to do layout in the browser. Before that, we always hacked layout. We did layout tables, then we did absolute positioning, then we did relative positioning, then we did floating, and everything was breaking somewhere, actually only in Internet Explorer all the time. And that annoyed a lot of developers that came from richer environments like Zool or Swing or whatever, Flash, whatever layout engines are out there. So with FLEXBOX, I got an opportunity to actually make elements properly aligned in the element that they're in. So in this case, I have the flex, which is the gray one here, which I give a width of height of pixels, a width of 100%, height of 100 pixels. And I say MOSBox pack start. So this is still in flux. So this is different for Mozilla than to Chrome and different to Chrome than to Internet Explorer. So we're still working on that one. But the definitions are the same. So in this case, I say start, give those three elements at the start of that box. I can also say center, and then it actually centers it to the middle of the box. And I can say end, which fascinatingly enough goes to the end of the box. I've got the MOSBox align, which does the same thing in the other space. So I can say center, center, and that way I would have these three elements in the center of the other element, no matter what their content is. And that was always the issue when we did it with float or when we did it with absolute positioning. So for proper layouts of apps, it's really important that we have this. So the other thing that we have there is I can say now a MOSBox flex thing here, which means that the elements take up the space that they actually have in the thing. So instead of having to just know what the content size is, I can just change the size of these different elements around, and they automatically keep up the space. So if I put another element in there, I would have no problem with actually doing that because the others would resize accordingly. So that's great for navigation menu items, these kind of things. And the MOSBox flex in this case, or the box flex, or whatever it's called in the other standard, it also gets a number. So I can say that the middle one should use 4 items and the other one should use 1. So I can actually allocate the space accordingly to all of them. And I can say the other one should take 2, and then it gets a bit smaller and bigger, and I can actually play with the space that I have that way without having to calculate the width or using percentage and then have rounding errors and these kind of things that I did in CSS2. It also has the MOSBox ordinal group, which in this case now means that the number 2, because I got the second child element, is just where it's supposed to be. But if I now put that into 2, it will actually go to the end of it. If I put that into 0, it will go to the front of it. So I have layout independent of how the layout in the page is. So I can actually shift things around no matter where they are in the document, which is something that wasn't possible with it was possible with a lot of hacking, but it wasn't possible out of the box with CSS. The order of my content defined the visual display of my content, which is not what I always want. So with FLEXBOX, I got the opportunity to really do proper layouts that work across all these issues that I had to have before. And a lot of apps, a lot of HTML5 apps are much smaller because they can actually have FLEXBOX now that before we didn't have. So that's stuff that's working right now. That's stuff that we have in the different browsers. So if you want to know anything about that, if you can use it, there's actually icanuse.com, caniuse.com, which is always updated according to which browser does what. So if I say, for example, here border radius, and I type that in, I find one result, and it shows me that Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Opera Mini doesn't do it, IE8 doesn't do it, others have it fine. If I say FLEXBOX, you will see that the support is not as good. FLEXBOX, well, fair enough. FLEXBOX. You see that it's actually it's still a bit in flux. It's not supported in iOS Safari too much, but actually fine in Chrome and fine in Firefox 21. And let's not forget, browsers change every 4 to 6 weeks nowadays. So if you say, oh, I can't use that right now, in 6 weeks you can. So trust the browsers to come up with cool stuff to use. And we need you to use that stuff, because if you don't, then we will not have an incentive to put it in. Like, browser makers are lazy developers like anybody else. If nobody complains about it, then we don't put it in. So another thing to learn layout is another website that actually just came out, which is a good overview of learning CSS and what CSS means. It's only on GitHub as well, so you can actually start playing with that as well, and it's a nice step-by-step introduction to CSS3. Now, this stuff works. Now, browser makers get very, very bored very quickly, so we want to do new things that people have been complaining about that CSS can't do for a long, long time. So one of the things is scoped style sheets, yeah? Coming to that. I'm so good. Of sorts. Scoped style sheets is the problem that I said before, that I cannot have an element that actually only is applying to a certain part of the document, but everything applies to everything. So scoped style sheet fixes that. So in this case, I now have a style type color blue, which means this would be blue. But inside that div, that I have another style element inside that div with an attribute called scoped, the P would be hot pink, but only in that div. So I can overwrite it only for the parent node of the style element that is in there. So you put a style element with a scoped attribute, and all the styles that you put in there will only apply to the element that it is in and not to the rest of the document. So that would allow to put, for example, a Twitter update widget thingy in there and put all the styles in there, but they won't mess with the rest of your document, which is very, very cool. But yeah, it's not according to all the browsers, not quite scoped yet. Weird enough. Variables. Everybody wants variables in CSS because we actually want every language to be the same and not like languages be understandable for the people that want to use it. So variable proposal was a long time ago and across different browsers, was in Chrome for a while, was then taken out or was changed again. So all this like prefix stuff. So you would have a header color, which is a color of 006, a main color, a secondary color of C06, and then I can say a color var, and so on and so forth. So you could define a color block on the front of your CSS or the beginning of your CSS, and then use the colors accordingly. Not quite there yet. Don't know if it's really necessary, but a lot of people have been asking for it, so people are thinking about it. MIXINS is another one, which MIXINS is to me like something like a function call in a JavaScript or something that I could put in somewhere else. So I would have a mixin error here called background of a red color and a color of red. And then I have a div error, I can put the mixin error here. So I could collate reused styles in a mixin and then actually reuse them in different sections of the page. So that way would be a server-side include or something like that. It's a very clever way of actually separating something out and putting it in there. But on the other hand, it makes the syntax harder, and it's quite an interesting concept. And the other thing that MIXINS now do is take parameters and take all these things. So we're getting into like JavaScript land inside CSS. And I always liked CSS because of its declarative nature. It was just like, I write something in there and it's fine. I don't have to know where it was applied or try to actually backtrace where it is, and we don't have any debugging tools for these kind of things yet. Nested selectors is something I wanted to have forever, but we don't have yet, and there are still certain proposals that are going in there. So instead of having to say table.hl and then table.hl_td.ln, I could actually nest one selector in another, much like I could do it in JSON or in other data formats. This is thought about as well. Not quite sure if it's going to happen. So a lot of stuff that's happening right now that is in CSS, not in CSS, but people want to have because it's cool to have, is going into precompilers, less SAS and Compass. So these things come up with their own syntax, come up in Ruby, come up in JavaScript and other languages, and convert the CSS that you actually write in that to CSS that browsers understand. So another thing that Less and Sass and Compass does is, for example, get rid of all the prefixes for you, so you can't just say transition, and you don't have to type the WebKit transition in as well to support Chrome, for example. This is useful, and it's very, very good for an environment where people are actually all using Less or all using Sass. But to me, it's actually an extra level of complexity. If I got a new developer coming into the project who never used Sass, I have to coach him up on Sass first. If the person used CSS, fine, he could start hit the ground running. So we're bringing more convenience for us and as developers, but we're bringing more complexity on the project as a whole. And the other issue I see with that is like we're thinking about all these cool things that we have in these languages already, but we don't have them in browsers yet because nobody's using them, because people use preprocessors. So people complain that browsers don't support certain things, but they never use them. So when I go to engineers and say like, hey, why don't we use a range? And they're like, we check the web. Nobody uses input type range. Everybody uses a jQuery plugin. Why should we use it? Because people use that jQuery plugin because we don't have it. Really? So it's an endless loop. I've seen great things in Less and CSS and projects being very, very small and very, very fast and very, very easy to change. But it's the same as with writing HTML through PHP. You gotta know what you're doing. In the end, you don't want to have obesity in your CSS. You want to know how big the final CSS is as well. It's great that you got 4 lines of Less, but if the CSS generated is like 600 lines, what have you really won? Because in the end user is the punished one, not you. So this is great, like how to save paper with lots of paper printouts. Way of doing it. And I have a whole, I planned a book, but I'm not going to make a book. I'm making a chapter now on the web diet, how we actually put more and more things into the web because we think it's convenient for us, but actually the end user suffers. There's great websites out there that are 25 meg of data, and you're like, really? We didn't go away from Flash to do this in HTML5 now. So in general, I think using CSS with care gets you very, very far. So knowing how CSS works, and knowing what impact the CSS has, and there's lots and lots of features out there, lots and lots of blog posts out there, is more important than going into an abstraction layer and hoping that everything works out. So there are 2 big things. There's Snacks by Jonathan Snook and OOCSS, Object-Oriented CSS by Nicole Sullivan. Both of them very, very good ideas how to actually architect your CSS, not just randomly type things in and hope the right things comes out. So a lot of that is like, don't put IDs on everything, but basically build your CSS for reuse, build your CSS for maintenance. So these are great tools to actually think about it. Object-oriented CSS is a bit of a misnomer if you come from hardcore object orientation because you don't have all the things in CSS, although CSS is Turing complete now, but let's not go into that. So, CSS survival guide to wrap up, because I think I'm already over time or something. So, write your CSS to make maintenance as easy as possible. Think about the poor maintainer. Think about the guy with the axe that knows where you live. What gets created is important, not how few lines you write. We save ourselves 10 lines and then we give people on a mobile phone 400 lines of CSS that they don't need. So make sure that you write it as clever as possible with reusing as much as possible rather than just like making as short as possible. Keep up to date. Hacks tend to linger far too long, like things that work in Internet Explorer 6 and I just put it in there because there might be 2 users still on Internet Explorer 6. Get rid of that crap. Everything that is a hack can become a security flaw as well. There's a wonderful talk, sadly enough in German, very simple language actually, or not, that shows you how many security flaws are in CSS as well and what you can do with outdated CSS hacks like expressions in Internet Explorer. I can actually do a lot of evil things without having to use JavaScript to hack your site. So things that are hacky are great for now, but think about removing them in the future somehow. Prefixes are to dry things out. Don't rely or trust them. That WebKit-WebKit thing that looks awesome right now will be different. The idea of prefixes is that we can change the syntax all the time. The idea of a standard is that the syntax has been defined. So you can write things right now that a month later, although you keep the same, you're using an iOS, using the same device, doesn't work anymore. Why? Because you used the prefix. If you can avoid images, do it. Images are hard to maintain. Images are hard to optimize. Images are taking a lot of space up and are actually a tricky thing to make right and look beautiful across different devices as well. Embrace the squishiness. The web is resizing constantly. You don't have any control over the screen. Make sure that your solutions actually resize according to what they can take up. And that's where FLEXBOX and things like that come in there. It's really, really cool. It's like, make sure that you don't do a pixel size perfect and say like this navigation has five items. No, that animation, that menu will have 10 items next time, or you translate it into German and out of a sudden you need like 5 times the space. Like wonderful words like safety belt warning sign, Sicherheitsgurt Leuchtanzeige, one word. Doesn't wrap, doesn't do anything. Your tab has to actually maintain that. Okay, you get overflow ellipses now actually in CSS as well, so we can have these things. Things not to do if you don't understand any of that and you basically think about what do I do in my CSS that is bad. Avoid highly specific selectors. You kill reusability, like the hash header p class so and so span third 15th one. If your HTML changes, your CSS is useless. Nobody will delete the CSS line though. That will keep lingering for the next few months. So the more specific your selectors, the actually more brittle they get when it comes to maintenance. Important is not a toy. A lot of times people don't know CSS and they just put an important at the end of it and like, hey, now it's green with yellow background. It's what everybody wanted. Important is there to be important, funnily enough. So important cannot be overwritten. So whatever you do in important, the next maintainer will have to deal with and will not be able to actually do anything about it. And when it's deep down in the 6,000th line of the 50th CSS file, you don't know where it actually came from. And I find it funny, being a JavaScript developer, having an exclamation mark important means not important, but it actually is important in CSS, so the syntax stuff is always quite good. Inline styles are a very, very, very last resort. Inline styles should not be there. The idea of CSS is that your look and feel is in the CSS file, not in the HTML file. So if you put a style equals so-and-so in your page, you actually made it harder to maintain. Avoid drop shadows and gradients on animated elements. They're actually very, very hard on the device. So when you animate it, it keeps re-rendering and constantly. On mobile phones, it can be very, very slow. So if you animate it, you might want to get rid of the drop shadow, and at the end of the animation, you can add the drop shadow again, for example. All these animations and transitions also have JavaScript events that are firing when they're actually starting or while they're transitioning. So you can actually interact between CSS and JavaScript very, very easily that way. IDs are unique. Are you sure the thing will always be a unique thing? So if you put an ID in there, it will be only once in that document. So if it's a header and then you actually have a list of things that all get the same header styling, a class would be a better option of doing it. IDs are very, very high in specificity and are actually accessible with JavaScript as well. So IDs are a very, very powerful thing. Just use them once in the document, otherwise it's invalid HTML, and make sure that these things are really as important as you think they are. Lots of files are good in production, bad in final product. Use as many CSS files as you want in your production, but actually concatenate them into one file when you're putting them out on the server. Because every HTTP request costs money, and every rendering of the CSS costs time in the browser as well. There's tools like Grunt, and there's yeoman.io, there's lots of build scripts that actually do these things automatically for you. Lots of environments do it for you as well. And there's no such thing as this will always be 10 characters. You cannot edit things out. You cannot trust that your end users that will maintain that product are sensible people. Just don't think about you can limit anything. And that's all we have time for, so thank you very much.